it away, Adam. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Payne. I'm a grower and a member of the coordinating group of the Landworkers Alliance, which is a union of farmers, growers, foresters and land-based workers working to develop agroecology and food sovereignty in the UK. And alongside a number of other areas of work, we currently convene the Farmstart network. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, giving you a brief insight into the model, the current state of play, opportunities and challenges, and that kind of thing. I'll run through that fairly quickly, and then we'll hand over to Simon, who's going to give a bit more kind of context from the ground, if you like. But we can come back and pick up anything that I've missed or brushed over too briefly in the questions. I'm standing in for a colleague, Xavier, and have been moving house and land, so I'm going to have to apologise, but I'm going to read some notes for this. But it's an issue close to my heart, and we've just found land after 10 years training in, working on and running kind of horticultural businesses in different parts of the UK and Poland, on 3 or 4 different sites. So it's I feel I'm definitely living a lot of the challenges that many new entrants experience trying to set up enterprises and make a living from this kind of work. Okay, so Catherine, can you show us the first slide? So what is a farm start or an incubator farm? Farm starts or incubator farms are setups that provide an opportunity for people to test their farming and growing ideas in a protected environment, whilst building the knowledge, skills, confidence and experience to progress onto their own farms or market gardens. There's a range of different projects working to provide access to land to new entrants, but farm starts or incubator farms stand out in that they tackle some of the deeper issues at a systemic level, and they're usually centrally managed by a group or organisation, and they give the new entrant autonomy to run their business, but with a kind of protected environment around them. There's currently various kind of incarnations of the model building around some themes, but the farm starts in the UK all offer protected access to several of the following key kind of issues that new entrants face. So that's land, markets, equipment and infrastructure, training and mentoring, business support, a community of other farm starters or agroecological producers, and some kind of progression opportunities beyond the farm start itself. They also are all agroecologically or organically run. By providing this kind of protected access to some of the key issues, farm starts take much of the financial risk and stress away from new entrants in the crucial early phases of the business, and allow them to focus on working out what kind of business suits them best and how they want to run it. It's a very adaptable model to all sectors, but it's most developed in the UK around horticulture, which is a relatively kind of high return and low overheads sector, and one where there's a lot of demand. That said, there are farm starts working on livestock, beef, sheep, pigs, chickens, for example, and nurserying in the UK at the moment. And so these models are an important entry route into farming and fill a gap in the current kind of opportunities for new entrants. For most people taking on a farm start opportunity, it will follow on from some form of training or on-farm work experience, and will give them a few years in which to test their businesses, test their ideas before really committing to setting up their own businesses on longer term foundations. Okay, so next slide, why do we need them? Farm starts are a solution to a number of obstacles that come from the kind of agroecology movement, really. And we see across the board a huge number of people wanting to make a livelihood in this kind of work. But there's a massive range of obstacles. So there's high startup costs, and it's really difficult to raise capital. Your average small business startup costs are 10, 20,000 maybe. Whereas within farming businesses, you're often looking at 50 to 200,000 before you're really talking about a lot of the land or housing. So startup costs are much higher, and the low margins and high risks of agriculture and forestry work mean that repayments on loans are often unaffordable and difficult to get in the first place. This is getting worse. In the last 20 years, new entrants wanting to start up on an ownership basis have seen costs increase by around 600%. So this is not something that's getting any easier. We did a survey of 156 new entrants last year, and 46% struggled with accessing finance. Another issue that people raise all the time is insufficient training or opportunities to trial businesses. So the same survey found that 54% struggled to access relevant training, despite 77% of the new entrants we surveyed or having education at a degree level or above. Only 21% had agricultural qualifications. So this indicates a real lack of relevant training, which people bring up again and again informally. Access to land, another big issue. In the same survey, 61% struggle with accessing land. And then cultural obstacles and fears of prejudice. And many people, particularly coming from BAME, or as in the movement we'd say BIPOC, Black, Brown, Indigenous and people of colour, or from LGBTQIA+ communities, hold real justifiable fears of prejudice when starting, launching into unknown in terms of training or business situation. So these are all big issues. Interestingly, the communities, BIPOC and LGBTQIA communities are much more represented within the agroecological sector. That same survey of new entrants found that 54% were female and 17% non-white British, of which 9% identified as Black, Brown, Indigenous or people of colour, and the average age was 37. So compared to kind of farming in general, this movement, the agroecology movement, has got a much more diverse set of people coming in, but experiencing big obstacles. And then the Farmstart model also attempts to address a number of obstacles facing society, which I'm sure you all are very aware of, and I don't really need to spell out, but seeing as I'm here, very briefly. An ageing farming population, so a third of all holders are over 65 years old, and the portion of young people aged less than 35 is about 3%, and that whole demographic is moving towards the older end of the spectrum. We've got consolidation of land and loss of farming infrastructure, making it very hard for people to enter the industry. In 2017, only 40% of farm purchases were made by farmers, and very few of them would have been new entrants, because, as I said earlier, the costs are rising and just getting out of reach for people. And then farming's got a diversity problem. It's the least diverse occupation in the UK, with 98.6% of farmers are white British, and in the 83 to 84% are male. And then the sector faces a huge range of challenges around nutrition, around biodiversity, around climate, that require innovative approaches. But we've got these kind of barriers to entry. So the Farmstart network is one way we look to address these. Okay, so next slide, Platten. So Farmstarts are models that are used in the USA, in Canada, and are very developed in France, where there's an organization called Renata, which is a national network of farm incubators. They started in 2007 and already have around 200 new entrants on 45 operational sites, with about 30 more in development. It's proved very popular, and they offer a very similar thing to us in the UK, in so much as they're kind of providing a nursery space where people can trial their businesses with the provision of land, tools, infrastructure and equipment. They provide mentoring and training and a community of other producers. And they also provide a kind of incubator as a legal framework which allows people to test their business without having to establish a formal enterprise. And I believe in France, actually, they also get 2 years worth of income support from government as part of that process. So in the UK, we kind of looked jealously to what was happening in France and thought, well, we should give this a try. And Kindling Trust up in Manchester established the first Farmstart in the UK in 2013, followed quickly by Organically and Tamar Grow Local, who you're going to hear from later on. And the project learned a lot in the first few years, and in 2015 began meeting at the Oxford Real Farming Conference and sharing experiences and kind of lessons learned with other farm starts and other people looking to address issues facing new entrants. And so building from that, we started to organize a few days on how to set up a farm start, visiting different people's sites and kind of sharing experiences. But there was never really enough time to support each other or the new projects properly. And so we sought to bring in a little bit of funding to do that. So in 2019, we successfully got a small grant for coordinating this network, which the Landworkers Alliance started to convene. So the current state of play of that network, at the moment there are around 7 operational sites in the UK and 3 in development, one sadly closed down last year as the land was sold. At any one time, there's around 30 farm starters on plots ranging from as small as 100 meters squared in some cases to shared access to a 500 hectare farm. It's probably not that useful to give an average size because the range is large and there's a lot of flexibility in many cases. But a lot of the horticultural units would be kind of starting on a quarter or half acre and then having more land available as they establish. The emphasis, as I said earlier, is on diversified vegetable production, but there are examples of sheep, pigs, goats, and nursery enterprises. And Stream Farm, the one that closed last year, was also running chickens, apples, and beef businesses there. Tenure ranges from a couple of years to indefinite in cases where the sites have enough land that they can carry on and providing more spots. The new entrants involved are generally self-employed, but the sites are providing costs, equipment, and training, which is subsidised by the organisations hosting the new entrants. And so that's the kind of model as it exists today, a few years into trialling it. And if you go on to the next slide, Catherine, we can see a few, the other way. There we go. So a few opportunities that this model is creating. I think at this point in time, we've kind of, there's a number of years experience under the belt of the organisations that are pioneering this kind of work, but there's a lot more that can be done with the right support. And I think, from here we can see this is a good way to invest in supporting a new generation of farmers and growers, and a good way to bring more diversity into the sector. And it's something that fills a kind of historic gap, really, between on people's journeys into agriculture before taking on the tenancy of a county farm or buying land. There's this kind of gap, really, where people need to trial their businesses, but they often can't afford to, or can't quite make that leap. So this is a good way to do it. It's also a relatively safe investment for public money, because these sites are often run by trusts or other organisations with asset locks, so we can prevent money leaving the sector inadvertently at a later stage. So money put into these kind of models can be held there and benefit new entrants for the long run. And the running costs are relatively low once sites are established, but high value to participants, and provide an opportunity that can be then reoffered because those capital investments in the site are benefiting multiple people over time. Okay, so next slide is some of the challenges. Funding really being the key one, although not necessarily a not very large amount, but if it varies within the network, but the model is funding reliant, and so new entrants generally are creating some income to pay for their costs, their direct costs, and their livelihood, but the sites are first of all funding the startup costs in the kind of capital and infrastructure, but then also providing training and mentoring. So kind of looking around within the network, it looks like average costs, and this is kind of a bit of a rough range, is in the range of £15,000 to £30,000 a year of kind of ongoing running costs. And that could be for 4 to 8 farm starters, say. So there's a need for funding, really. And it's hard to see how that could be any other way based on the model. So we think that these kind of models need to be funded by government or local authorities. A second challenge really is developing the model in sectors that need more land or capital, or have a higher risk to run. So it's definitely underrepresented in arable and dairy, but the model is totally adaptable and applicable. It's just a question of getting those set up in an environment where there's not quite enough support to do so. And then the third challenge, I suppose, is the same as facing any other kind of new entrant startup in agriculture, which with low food prices, consolidated markets, cash flow issues, high startup costs, a very, very similar picture. But the model does allow some buffering against them. Okay, and final slide, Catherine, is next steps for the model. So yeah, this is Farmstart's a grassroots initiative that have been set up by some really pioneering organisations, and I think they've really proven that they have the value and scope to scale up and scale out into something really visionary and useful that can solve a lot of the issues new entrants and society are facing. The question is where we go and how we get there. And I think, what we'd really like to see is proper investment into sites and into training, and ideally to support the income of the new entrants themselves for a year or two, as they do in France. And I think this means both direct funding to the organisations that are running these kind of farm starts, but also incentives to local authorities and landowners to make land available. And I think we could, really thinking of this, we could see this going a lot further and developing a bit of a rolling model where farm starters are, given a couple, 2 or 3 years to test their models, but then can also become tenants on larger areas of land for the longer term. And with the right support organisations playing that role, there's no reason we couldn't see the model developing in that direction. And then to scale out, I think, to put some investment into seeing the Farmstart model and trying the Farmstart model in arable, in dairy, in some more extensive kind of businesses. Yeah, so there we are. That's a brief introduction to the Farmstart model and network, and some quick thoughts on opportunities and challenges. I'll hand over, but very happy to take any questions on that later on.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I think if we go straight to Simon, and then we'll just do the whole discussion and questions at the end. So if everyone could just hold their questions for now, and we'll come back to that when Simon's finished as well. Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Adam, as well.
Thank you. Right, so Adam's given us a good overview of why the farm starts are necessary. I think my purpose today is really to give some more detail of one of the sites, how it was set up, how we recruit farm starters, what kind of what are their challenges, what are our challenges in running a farm start site, and just to give you a bit more detail, really.
Yeah, so there we are. That's a brief introduction to the Farmstart model and network, and some quick thoughts on opportunities and challenges. I'll hand over, but very happy to take any questions on that later on.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I think if we go straight to Simon, and then we'll just do the whole discussion and questions at the end. So if everyone could just hold their questions for now, and we'll come back to that when Simon's finished as well. Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Adam, as well.
Thank you. Right, so Adam's given us a good overview of why the farm starts are necessary. I think my purpose today is really to give some more detail of one of the sites, how it was set up, how we recruit farm starters, what kind of what are their challenges, what are our challenges in running a farm start site, and just to give you a bit more detail, really. So, Catherine, are you able to share my slides, or should I do those?
Yeah, I can share that if you like.
Marvellous, thank you.
Sure.
So we, Tamar Grow Local, are based on the Devon and Cornwall border, and right down in the southwest. We took as our kind of area of activity the river catchment for the Tamar Valley, and it's got quite a large area of farmland and the big city of Plymouth at the mouth of the river. It's a very big area, and we're really only active in the kind of tidal reach of that, so the bottom half of that area. That area had a rich history of market gardening all through the 18th and 19th, 20th century. We've got a very favourable microclimate for horticulture. It's 2 weeks earlier than Evesham for many crops, and in its heyday, we were sending, not personally, but the area was sending produce up to markets in Glasgow, Birmingham, London overnight on the trains and everything. So it's a very good area for market gardening. However, many factors threw that into decline. But what we see now is an opportunity for horticulture to create a supplementary income for a lot of people and to create a resilient kind of household income locally. We live in an area where there's lots of part-time employment, lots of people who are self-employed, and a supplementary income is quite useful, but also necessary in order to create a resilient, rural, stable livelihood. So our farm start has been set up with this very much in mind. It's not something that we've geared up for a full-time job in horticulture, but something that it can fit in around another part-time job and create a resilient income for the household. If I have the next slide, please. So Tamar Grow Local was set up 14 years ago now, and we operate what's best described as a constellation of local food initiatives which all join together. And one of those is our Farmstart site, which we started 6 years ago now. And what we noticed through our other work around an online farmers market, that we just didn't have the volume of local production that we needed in order to satisfy the demand that was out there. And whilst we canvassed for other growers to start up or scale up, we recognized that there was a number of barriers that they faced, many of which Adam has already talked about. But one in particular that we noticed was that the market was failing to incentivize scaling up from micro production to start engaging in wholesale production. And that's a very risky transition for a small-scale horticultural business. And we were looking for ways in which we could de-risk that, but also to get people who were growing in crowded back gardens or trying to do it on allotment sites or had small areas of land to be able to scale up or try out businesses on a larger scale. So we set up our Farmstart at Mill Lane Acres. It's a 12.5 acre site, which we've subdivided into 1 acre plots. We lease it on a farm business tenancy ourselves. So it's a 10-year farm business tenancy, and we rent it at market rate. We've subdivided it. Each 1 acre plot has a small polytunnel, as you can see in the photo, and access to other facilities on site. And the tenants rent it on an annual farm business tenancy, more of which I can go into later. Can I have the next slide, please, Catherine? So there's a picture of the site in its early stages of development. So each plot is initially 1 acre, but though some people can ask to have half an acre if they're not confident of working 1 acre initially. We have allowed businesses to scale up to around 3 acres. For us, we've got no shortage of land. The farmer that we work with, the landowner, has said we can double our holding as soon as we like, within reason and in synchronicity with his agricultural cycle. So we're encouraging people to stay on our site if their businesses are successful and finding ways in which they can scale up. And this is a difference from other Farmstart projects and indeed the way it works in France, in the espace test in France. You have to graduate from that site and move on to your own business area. We really, it's in our interest to keep people, and we try and do that through the rentals that we offer. So the rent goes down if you spend 3 years on our site, and that's basically covering the costs of the initial infrastructure that we've put on there, and recognizing that those costs have been spread over 3 years and they're not covered. We can then reduce the rent. So we put a polytunnel on there. We have water harvesting for water off farm buildings and collection on site. The site also has a yard for off-road parking, and it's also got a barn complex. We rent some of that space, so there's shared undercover area for storage and processing and packing, and there's a welfare space, which is a grand title for a wheelless caravan, but it's a nice place to shelter from the cold and make a cup of tea. Next slide, please, Catherine. So we established in 2015, and as I said, we got a 10-year farm business tenancy on the land. We had to put in a planning permission to make sure we were adhering by the rules and it was a level playing field with everybody else. So we have planning for all of our polytunnels. We have planning for a couple of sheds and a water harvesting roof that was also on site, and planning for additional polytunnels if we want to expand. The tenancy agreements were drawn up by a land agent, and we're able to give those to the tenants. So one of the benefits of having a Farmstart is you don't then have to develop your own tenancy agreement and pay for that with a land agent. We've got the stock tenancy agreements which can be adapted. we do require new tenants to go through an application process. This has become increasingly stringent over the 5 years, 6 years now, as we've learned what needs to happen. Initially, we were more flexible than we should have been. So now we have, we always had a business plan that had to be submitted, but now we have an annual review. And in the first year, we have a 6-monthly review of the business with the tenant to see how it's going, to talk over ways in which we could help, assist, or suggest further developments for their business. That's proved really useful for tenants. In the first 2 or 3 years, we also had a mentoring budget, but we haven't had that for the last 3 years. So the business plan and the business review meetings are kind of forming the mentoring from the business side of things. And we've encouraged peer-to-peer learning on site and with other local market gardeners where we can, to try and cover some of the mentoring needs. So the tenancy agreements are for 1 year, and that's a little contentious. So it doesn't necessarily give complete security of tenure, but it does mean that it can be given out to Farmstart tenants on easy in, easy out terms. So they're not tied into a lease for 5 to 10 years. From our point of view, it does create some issues when a business decides that it's not for them and they wind down. Often that process of decision making takes some time, and the plot can be left in a bit of a state, and then it needs to be redeveloped again before we can let it out. And on an annual business tenancy, it's quite difficult to hold a tenant to account to remediate a plot. It also, for security of tenure from a tenant's point of view, if they're making quite a lot of investment on the site, and we've got one tenant who's put in a vineyard, which is a substantial investment, they need to be able to trust us to renew their tenancy year on year. And well, they do, thankfully. And I think that's because we've been around for 14 years and we've got a good reputation as an organization. And the benefits of having an easy in, easy out term outweigh the security of tenure issue, in our opinion. Next slide, please. So we've purposefully clustered all of our Farmstart plots together. So one field contains 5 Farmstart plots, and the others are all in adjacent fields. And the idea there was to kind of create opportunities for people not to be lone working all the time, because horticulture and farming generally can be quite a lonely business. But also to create economies of scale. So if people are hiring contractors in to do ploughing or harrowing, it makes sense to join forces with neighbours and to bulk purchase that. And then it's easier for a contractor to come in and do several plots at once. So our local farm contractors are used to doing tens of acres, and to half acre of rotivation doesn't feature high on the list of priorities, but if you can join enough together, then we can get that done and have economies of scale in purchasing. We've also trialed crop aggregation, where several tenants have grown the same crop and then aggregated it and sold it collectively. There's also opportunities for reciprocal working. So if there's a particularly heavy job that needs doing on one plot, then perhaps tenants from another plot will come over and help, and vice versa. That hasn't worked quite as well as we hoped it would, not just because people aren't necessarily on the site at the same time, but what we have noticed is that tenants seem to be buying one expensive bit of kit that's useful for their plot, and then sharing it amongst each other or subcontracting to each other to use it, which has been quite sort of encouraging to see. There's been a lot of peer-to-peer mentoring and a lot of chatting between tenants and talking about how to set up, how to do things. And we think that this kind of peer-to-peer mentoring and this clustering of businesses does foster innovation. As people see what others are doing, they can copy it if it's successful, or they can collectively purchase or collectively share ideas. Next slide, please. So the big topic for us has been churn of tenants. And I think if it's an incubator space where you graduate from the space after a year or two, you don't necessarily see the same longevity or problem of longevity of farm businesses, particularly startups. So if you look at Federation of Small Business statistics, 50% of small businesses fail within the first couple of years. And we were thinking, with all the other support that we provide to small horticultural businesses, that we would be able to improve on that figure. But I'm not sure that we have. The churn is not necessarily, although sometimes it's because people realize it's not for them, but sometimes life just gets in the way and businesses haven't been perhaps set up in the right way to be successful from the outset. So we wanted to make sure that our Farmstart project could cope with the churn of tenants, and we'd set up in such a way that assets don't get lost. So Adam was mentioning the amount of money involved in setup costs. Well, a Farmstart can kind of mitigate repeat funding of those by holding the assets within a larger organization that has greater longevity. And so a Farmstart business can come in and rent those assets. And if the Farmstart business doesn't continue, those assets aren't lost. They're there and available for use by another business to come along and make use of them. So the investment isn't lost in those. And we have had to deal with the winding down of several businesses. Fortunately, though, we've also had to deal with the scaling up of several businesses, which is quite nice. And here's a picture of the vineyard, which is now occupying 3 acres and will be producing wine this year, available from all good stockists. And we've also had to deal with tenants outgrowing us, which is nice, and moving on to other sites, either purchasing their own land or being offered land for free in one case, which was good for them, or just moving away and setting up their businesses elsewhere. And that has happened, and we count that as a success, really. Can I have the next slide, please, Catherine? So the Farmstart works for us because it's part of a wider system and it fits in well with our other activities. So we run a lot of community food initiatives. We run produce cooperatives where we sell produce from multiple producers under a shared label for honey and apple juice. We run an online farmers market, which is kind of the backbone of our organization, which sells produce from around 60 local producers, including our Farmstart producers. And we have social impact work where we provide vegetables to people experiencing food insecurity or looking to change their diets following a diagnosis of diabetes, for example. And all of these initiatives are mutually supporting. And for the Farmstart in particular, they make use of the markets that's able to offer them. So our Farmstart tenants have access to the land and the infrastructure on site, but they also have access to selling on our food hub. They have access to our equipment bank for equipment to take to a farmer's market if they start running again, and to do their own events on site. We had a processing kitchen until recently, which people could come and rent. That's still available, but not directly through us. And it's all part of a support package which new tenants and Farmstart producers can access by being part of our wider organization. And for me, the Farmstart is very much part of a solution, but it's not the entire solution. And supply chains and other routes to market and other means of support also need to be factored in. Next slide, please. So there's a bit of info about our food hub. It's a retail distribution model essentially, but for Farmstart producers, it's great because they receive 85 pence in the retail pound and they set their own prices. And that means they can concentrate on the production, and for 15p in the pound, they can delegate the marketing and the distribution, which is great, but it also helps them to scale up to wholesale growing. Through our social impact work, we have a small but guaranteed wholesale market that they can tap into, which again de-risks that scaling up from small scale production towards wholesale. And the idea is that they would outgrow us and then start supplying regional wholesale, but we can provide that stepping stone. And so that's the Grow Share Cook project does that. Next slide, please. So that's a lovely picture of 2 tenants celebrating in their new polytunnel as the sun sets over the valley. And I think I'll end there. Happy to answer questions. I'm sure I've forgotten some things, but Adam will no doubt remind me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to both of you. I think there's a question from Kate, and if anyone else wants to either pop your question in the chat or flag your hand and I'll try and keep an eye. But Kate, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, both presentations, and one of the things that is obviously key is the business support for the new entrants. And you mentioned it in a few different places, both like at a larger level and at the Farmstart level. And I just wondered how that was delivered. Is it like a course or a series of courses, or are business advisors contracted to provide that sort of one-to-one stuff, or is it mainly informal? And like Simon mentioned, doing a business review with them, do you do that yourself, or how does that work?
If I may answer that one first, we initially started trying to pair our new tenants with the options locally for kind of formal business training, and we signposted to adult ed courses for that. But the business side of things wasn't necessarily something that the Farmstart tenants that we had at the outset initially recognized as something they needed to do. It becomes more obvious after about 6 months when you've got produce to sell, and you suddenly have to start thinking about it a bit more. And we then started trying to develop a qualification through again through adult education locally, but it wasn't attractive enough to the growers, because they didn't want to go to an evening school. They wanted to learn in situ and in the field practically. And so we've started delivering our mentoring such as we can in that kind of way. So we have run particularly practical sessions around packing and packaging produce for sale. And I know the Farmstart network has been working on a level 2 qualification specifically developed for Farmstart growers, which is almost entirely done on the ground, on site, which is great. In terms of the business review meetings, I myself and our business manager basically invite tenants in, and we sit down and have a chat, and we tend to go through their business in as much detail as they're happy to, but we do press them for figures, and try and suggest ways of improving margins, different markets to access, trying to make connections, trying to look for ways in which they could scale up. And so it is done in-house. It's not done by external contractors, but my reticence to engage external contractors is from a feeling that the Farmstart tenants would prefer it was done in-house rather than coming from something that might seem a little more external and not as familiar with the issues at hand.
Thanks, Simon. Adam, did you want to add anything to that? Yeah,
just briefly, I think all of those are done. There's a kind of baseline of peer-to-peer in every situation, and then depending on the resources available to the kind of hosting organization, there are more or less formalized kind of additional courses or brought in contractors, brought in advisors. And as Simon mentioned, I neglected to say in my presentation that we're working on accredited training that can be delivered across the Farmstart sites, and that will incorporate farming and growing practice, but also the kind of business management side of things. I mean, this was in recognition of a real dearth of appropriate training that addresses these issues and is kind of really relevant to the needs of tenants. But some of the members of the network have developed their own kind of short courses that they deliver to the tenants on their sites.
Thank you. Thanks. I think, Graham, you had a question about barriers. Do you want to go with that one, please?
Yes, Jenny, thanks very much. I mean, I guess often we look at these kind of models of things, we forget that actually it needs really strong people to make them happen. And I guess I wonder what you feel your role is in making this work in your area. And I guess linked to that then is the question of what is that an issue, and what are the other barriers for this being transferred to other parts of the country and effectively scaled up as a model for incubators across the country, which would be really great. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well,
Adam, is that,
oh,
yeah. Oh, go Simon.
I'm
Simon,
sorry,
I was going
yeah.
to say maybe Adam, that's one for you, but yeah.
Oh, well, if you want to say something, Adam, first, that's fine.
No, you go, Simon. I'll add on.
Okay. Okay. So we are already seeing demand for help to help other Farmstart set up. I think one of the purposes of the Farmstart network is to compile almost like a template set of documents and processes and procedures and things to think about to help other organizations set up and mentor them in the process. And then again, that's something that the Farmstart network could do with additional resource to do, because it's something that we've struggled with individually over the last 5-6 years. As an organization, Tamar Grow Locals had some funding over the last couple of years to help other organizations replicate parts of our model, and the Farmstart is one of the things that's particularly attractive to other organizations. And we've tried to help others replicate that, but from our point of view, it really does need to be part of a wider system that incorporates markets and mentoring and training, and it's not a magic bullet on its own. It needs to be a part of a wider, more holistic approach that includes those other things.
Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, I fully agree with Simon, really, that yeah, I think strong local organizations really are the key to this working, and everywhere that it does work, it's succeeded on the strengths of the organization that's hosting it. But they can be built, these are, all of these, the oldest Farmstart is only 8 years old, and there are many within that come from organizations that have established themselves during that period. I think scaling this out would require us to incubate the incubators in some sense, and that needs funding, but it also needs some kind of caution. I don't think this is the kind of thing that could just effectively be flung open and expected to succeed immediately. But I think with a few years and some well-targeted funding, we could definitely grow this quite significantly.
I'll come to Sarah in a minute, because she's popped a question in the chat, but I just wanted to ask a follow-up question, if I can, about the kind of gap. So your map of the Farmstart network, Adam, was really interesting, because we're trying to map the different providers of new entrant opportunities in DEFRA as well. So I'm sure one of the team will be in touch with you about that, and if we can add it into our map. But obviously there's a bit of a gap. There's only a few at the moment, and particularly a gap in the north and northeast. And I wondered if that's something that you, as the Landworkers Alliance, are trying to tackle, like you said, almost incubating the incubators, or obviously funding is needed to help with that, but is that something you're aware of as an issue in terms of geographical coverage?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is, for us at the moment, we're just being led by where there are organizations who want to make this step. So we're available as a network to network, to provide support, to connect people to other organizations that are doing it well. And to some extent, we're proactively reaching out and seeking organizations that do want to set up Farmstarts. But really, yeah, with the resources we have at the moment, we just have to be led by where there's demand.
Yeah, no, thank you. Sarah, did you have a question you wanted to go next?
Yeah, hi there. Thanks for that. It's a really fascinating presentation. I just wanted to get a sense of how much competition there is to take part in the Farmstart programme, and what kind of criteria you use to pick people.
Well, I can speak for ours. We've currently got a waiting list of 14 prospective tenants. We've got space to take on another 5 in September. We ask each prospective tenant to submit a business plan, and that is a fairly light touch business plan in the first instance, just to see if they're willing to even think about a business plan, and that's often the first filter. And then when we get the first business plan, we invite people in for a chat and then say, do you want to go and change your business plan and alter it? And then we start the process of refining that business plan until to the point where we're happy with it. Then we send it off to our directors, who have a scoring matrix, so make sure it's all done fairly, and then they approve it or not. and we go from there. And we set up an annual tenancy from the point at which their business plan has been approved.
That's really interesting. And how long, sort of roughly, is that quite a quick process, or what's the lead-in time?
It really depends on how fast the tenant wants to act. So we can turn it around in about 4 weeks, but it depends on how quickly they respond. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. And I think, Miriam, you had a question for Adam potentially, and also Simon, I think.
Mr. Simon.
Yeah, over Simon, sorry.
But any answers would be appreciated. So just Simon, Adam mentioned that starter farms are dependent on funding generally. And I wondered if your model, I've said Tamar Organics, my question, but now I'm doubting if that's actually the name. Anyway, is dependent on funding, or do you break even? And then another question is, do you think that, now I'm just being selfish here and thinking about us as an estate and whether we could host a starter farm, do you think that starter farms work best as groups? Both of you maybe, or is there, when you're talking about approaching landowners to have a starter farm, say there's an existing farm, do you think that it works well to have like a small starter farm as part of an existing farm, or do they work better as groups?
Right, well, Tamar Grow Local, Tamar Organics is just up the road, but Tamar Grow Local we try and set up all our initiatives so they're self-financing, and that hasn't been possible with the Farmstart. Initially we thought it would be, but we had underestimated the remediation of plots once people leave if they don't continue their businesses, the maintenance of the site, and the time that we spend recruiting tenants. We hadn't appreciated at the outset when we did our own business plan that we'd need to spend quite so much time doing that. The costs that Adam mentioned, the ballpark figure around 2015 to £30,000, that includes a good bit of mentoring, and we've managed to make ours more or less break even, but by reducing the amount of mentoring we offer, and it's not ideal. And the other work that we do with our tenants and supporting other organisations, that's cross-subsidised by our other activities. The Farmstart works for us because a lot of the produce that's produced there ends up being sold through our online farmers market, and we make a small margin on that to help cover our overheads. And it's necessary in order to revitalise the local horticultural sector. And so we're willing to try and cross-subsidise it as much as we can, but it's not enough to do it justice. So I would say it is something that definitely needs funding. It's not something that can stand alone. I do think that clustering businesses is a really good idea though, because there's always complementary things that can happen. There's always opportunities for economies of scale as far as I can see, and for peer-to-peer learning in both directions, and it just fosters innovation. And also people who are alongside a larger farm, people who are working at a smaller scale can work more intensively and produce things which aren't possible on a larger scale. So I do think clustering is a good thing.
Thank you. Adam, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, again, echoing Simon, really, I think, to say on that kind of clustering point, I'd say, that the benefits of clustering are brilliant, but it's definitely not essential. And I think there'll be ways to make it work if there are limitations on space that prevent that. But often you can really achieve some of those benefits, through the peer-to-peer exchange and through the kind of aggregation. And then, again, on the funding, I was going to just add into that it's one Kindling Trust, which is one of the Farmstarts based up in Manchester. On one of their sites, they have a kind of someone who's working there 3 days a week as a support person for the farm starters. So a significant portion of that, their kind of training and mentoring, comes through the support of this person who's there available to discuss issues as they come up, to like provide a kind of less formal but very present mentoring, and that kind of service increases the the costs of it. So Tamar Grow Local have done a great job of keeping them down, but slightly at the expense of that training and mentoring, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. I had a question. I don't think there's any other questions in the chat just now. So I've got a question, if I may, about the startup costs, the setup costs, Adam, as opposed to the running. So you said the average running costs are around between 15 and 30,000 a year. But what are the sort of average setup costs in terms of establishing a Farmstart in the first place?
I don't have any like data on that at my fingertips, but we did a kind of a survey of the members, and we could follow that up and establish that for you if that's useful. I suppose the thing is, many of the members of the network are kind of adding this on to infrastructure and sites that they've been developing for over a number of years, so don't have a kind of clear picture right away. And it depends whether they're set up on an ownership or a kind of rental basis.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
We've got a range of statistics on kind of average business startup costs.
Yeah.
The different agroecological scenarios we could look at, and we can definitely get some more data on specifics from the members of the network if that's useful.
Yeah, that would be useful. I think it gives an idea of the scale of an initial investment that's needed to get, say, a new Farmstart project off the ground. I think that's kind of useful information to inform kind of funding schemes, I think.
Yeah.
Anyone? Yeah, sorry.
Simon, do you have figures for that Mill Lane Acres site to hand?
Yeah, kind of. It's I think the difficulty in coming up with those costs is that each of the models is slightly different as well, and operates on a different scale of land. And obviously, if it's part-time horticulture, the infrastructure is slightly different from fully undercover intensive horticulture. So we benefit from a site which already had a lot of infrastructure on it, and in terms of a yard and electricity installed and undercover space. One thing we would like to put in is a borehole water system, so we're not too reliant on harvested water, which has its own problems. But I think our initial investment, I can pull out the exact figures, but it's in around £30,000, and it was fairly modest in terms of what we purchased. If we had an additional 20 on top of that, it would be an all singing, all dancing Farmstart site. But then that's in our location for our model.
Okay, thank you. And that 30,000 provided opportunities for how many new tenants did you say before?
Well, we've currently had 19 tenants go through the system.
Yeah.
We've got 10 on site at the moment.
Yeah, so that's relatively small initial investment for that many opportunities, I would say. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you.
Definitely. I think just to relay back again, I'd say I think that does sound very low, relatively speaking, and that if you're looking at a kind of bare land holding without the barn, and
it'd be a lot more
there, you're probably talking more in the 150,000, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Borehole, barn and some polytunnels.
Thank you. Oh, great. Any other questions from anyone else? Got a couple of minutes before we have to wind up, and just checking if anyone's got their hand up. Can't see anyone. No. In that case, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Adam and Simon. That's really, really useful. And yeah, kind of that sort of follow-up information on startup costs will be useful. We can follow up with you on that sort of outside the meeting, obviously. And thank you very much. And I hope to see you all at the next